Hey fam, today we have a low-key, unscripted video in my bedroom where I'm gonna talk about something I've always wanted to talk about, and it's gonna ruffle some feathers for kind of everyone. But you know what? Everyone's feathers are ruffled, so what's a couple more, right? Today we're gonna talk about what is cEDH. And what prompted this is kind of this community response to this line by the professor from this interview he did with cEDH Brazil. It's a great interview. Highly recommend you watch it, not just for like cEDH or whatever, but just like it's a fun time. And my favorite part actually doesn't have anything to do with cEDH. It has to do with accessibility of magic and magic products in other countries. And I really like hearing about it. So I'm not gonna spoil anything. Go watch it if you haven't watched it after this. I don't know, go watch it. But today we're talking about what is cEDH. And it's a question I've always, if you can hear a hiss, that's like the heater in my room. I can't control it, so sorry about that. And I guess my cat's playing right now. Okay, well this is like a very low-key video. All right, so what is cEDH? Before I jump into the question of what is cEDH and how I feel, like what my definition of cEDH is, I just wanted to cover really quickly. Like I started playing Commander, not competitively. I got a Kalia deck, thought it was cool, and then looked on MTG Salvation for other commanders and kind of went from there. cEDH was really an interest of mine only in the last like 3-4 years really, and I think that's very similar to a lot of other people. I think like the format itself isn't that old. I think like it's 7 years at most, or at oldest. And I think the reason why I want to share my history, because that's when I like really dug into like what is cEDH, and our community, which is cEDH, has a very clear, like has a lot of clear ideas of what is not cEDH, and that's what I'm going to start with first. When my first cEDH deck is a Silas Timna deck that did really well against the Flash meta. It just kind of it's like another mid-range ad nauseum deck that kind of took advantage of people wanting to play slower, so I had the time to use Timna to like grind and counter spells, interact, and then like eventually like do some really funny stuff with Transmute Artifact or Torrential Gear Hulk into Bolus. There was like a lot of crazy stuff. There was Doomsday, and in my own local meta where I played in my LGS and like I played at GPs, like it did very well. And I liked the deck a lot, but eventually I got into playing Sisay with Gigantha. If you don't know, like that's kind of what I'm known for. I started trying that out, and I remember when I first played it in my old local like play group, I guess. My cat. When I started playing that deck in my own local play group, like I was winning consistently on turn 3 and turn 4. Then I took that deck to like the cEDH Red Discord. I remember the first time, and I was trying to show its strategies, talk about it like seriously or competitively from my perspective, because it seemed strong to me. And I play Modern, I play like Legacy and a bunch of other formats. Like I draft a lot, like I play everything. So to me, like from my competitive mindset, I'm like, this seems competitive. And I remember it was like kind of dismissed, and like it was considered a meme and stuff like that. And I wouldn't say it was like disheartening, but it was a little frustrating because I didn't really know what parameters I'm measured against, and it was also difficult because there's like a sentiment that's like, how can you say this is competitive when this other thing exists? There's this other strategy, and in my mind it was hard to like kind of take that feedback because in my own personal perspective, like my own experience, it did well when I played it, right? It did well in GPs, or not, it couldn't have been GPs, there were no GPs back then, but like for that deck, but like it did well across all my tiny little local metas. So how can someone just say it's not good enough? So then I started playing it in their leagues, and it was doing pretty well in their leagues. I think it was like at least 30-40% win rate, and then there was like some feedback, but like, well, only like you're playing against other Sisays and Narset and like Paco or whatever. Like you're not really playing against like the real cEDH deck. So this isn't, you can't really take that data like, you know, honestly or whatever, or at face value. And I was like, oh, okay, so I need to take it to a tournament. Do I need to take it? How far do I have to go with this? Eventually I just kind of gave up. I just figured like, if someone doesn't want to consider that deck like as under their definition of what cEDH or what is competitive, I'm never gonna prove it to them. I'm not gonna waste my time doing that. I'm just gonna keep refining the deck, keep working on the deck the way I want to work on it, and I'll play it. And if it does well, it does well. If I don't really care what people think in terms of competitiveness. So that kind of ties into what I think about the question, what is cEDH? Because we all, I think when you start playing cEDH, you start to like kind of learn these heuristics and patterns, and you start like adopting those patterns as like, oh, these are the pillars of what like the meta is about. For example, like right now, like cEDH, some people think is like, well, if you can't win on turn 2, then that's not cEDH. If you're not playing like Turbo Nas or like Peer into the Abyss, Breach combos, like, or like 5-color, 3-color combo, then that's not really cEDH. And you're playing like a fringe meme deck, stuff like that. So that's I think a little frustrating. But then I started like thinking about a little bit more after I started brewing more decks in while I'm like within this community. So I have this deck. It's on like my channel. It's like under the episode Into the North. No, sorry, Into the Middle. It's a parody of Into the North. Sorry, I can't remember my jokes now. It's a parody of. It's this episode called Into the Middle, where 2 friends of mine, maybe 3, I didn't measure the last guy, and he's kind of upset about it. Kazu, I'm sorry. I made this deck called Fright Thief with them, not just me. We made this deck called Fright Thief, and the deck plays like Sire of Insanity, Embercleave, and all these memes as competitively as possible. And in my mind, I was thinking like, well, what's the difference between this list and I guess like a high powered list, or it's clearly not optimal, right? Like it's clearly not competitive because we're choosing to play non-competitive cards in this deck. But if we bring it to like a cEDH like pod or something like that, the players will accept it. Like they will accept that this deck is somewhat cEDH. It's not like proper cEDH or whatever, but it's still within the realm of cEDH. So that got me thinking like a little bit like why does that list okay? And then some other lists like that are competitive in intent, but not cEDH. So that kind of got me thinking a little bit. So this guy has been like doing, I don't know what he's doing, like a leaf blower or something for the last like 20 minutes, and I thought I can wait it out, but I can't. So I'm gonna record it and see how bearable it is, and if it's unbearable, I have to re-record the whole thing. But if it's bearable, then I'm sorry, you're gonna have to listen to this. This is why you don't record in the morning in like a city. Anyways, back to the video. Another thing I wanted to bring up is from my experience in casting tournaments and also participating in tournaments, there's kind of like a weird spot or like an awkward meeting of like communities when you have like a competitive commander tournament like Marchesa on 2020, 2021, even the one before that, where you have like players who aren't familiar with the meta, like the online meta that people are like kind of that is more defined, and they bring in like, let's say Damia that is just high powered Damia with like a lot of like Force of Wills and Mana Crypt and like a Thassa's Oracle on a console, but it's not like curated to the point that is similar to what we would expect in like the cEDH decklist database, right? Like decks like that show up, and then you also have like, let's say some people will bring in Sliver Queen. I don't know why I use this example, but like Sliver Queen, Sliver Tribal, but Force of Wills, like I don't know, maybe a Thassa's Oracle console, or just like big money cards like Gaia's Cradle and stuff like that to a tournament like this, and you get to see like the pods, like they're really different from what we expect in like the online metas and stuff like that, and that kind of comes into question, like, is that cEDH? Are you really playing cEDH? If you lose to like Sliver Tribal because you don't play Wraths, did you really lose to cEDH? Were you really playing a cEDH game? Like those kind of things come up, and it's really interesting for me to think about when we ask this question, what is cEDH? And basically the way I think about it is cEDH is a shorthand for an understood meta. Like it's rule 0 for like a group of players, so to quickly understand what to expect when they play commander. When I say I'm playing cEDH, I'm fully expecting that someone will try to win by turn 2 or turn 3, and I will optimize my strategies to play into that meta, and not only like try and beat it, but I think the important point here, what separates like a deck that some players don't want to play against versus like my Mimi, like whatever Doom Scramble Fright Thief deck, is that when I make these decks, I'm also making it to play into those metas in good faith and give them like a semi-good game. Like I think that's the important part of cEDH, is that it's not a format. Like I think there are people who will like definitely argue with me that it's a different format, it's a different beast, but to me it's all the same thing. It's all commander, and cEDH is just like an abbreviation of like an understood set of like rules and social engagements that we take. When we say cEDH, we are fully understanding that there's like the whole king making aspect, and like playing with no spite and stuff like that. And when you attack, you're making your attacks based on like whatever you consider to be optimal versus like what is like emotion, like what you're doing emotionally, I guess. That is what cEDH encompasses, and that is what I consider to be cEDH. And the reason why I want to bring it up like this is because I had a really great interview of cEDH Dojo. Finally, that guy stopped. No, he's still going, god damn it. I had a really great interview of cEDH Dojo, and at the end of the interview, Lex brought up that he wanted to brew this deck. He wanted to make his deck his own, and it's a Feldegriff like Dramatic Scepter, I believe, or something like that. Like he wanted to take Feldegriff and make it as competitive as possible, and he ended that like short little description of what he wanted to do with like, I know it's not cEDH, and I corrected him because I feel like if you're in good faith trying to take a strategy in Commander and play it into the no meta, play into that like understood set of social rules as competitively as possible in good faith, I think that's cEDH. And I know like people will disagree with me, like Feldegriff with Dramatic Scepter is not cEDH, but in my mind, as long as you're taking anything you're interested in and trying to like play competitively within and give a good game to the people playing in those metas, or like understanding what's like with their understanding what cEDH is, I consider that to be cEDH. It's so hard to define like what is cEDH based on like deck lists, based on like piloting intent. I think intent is the most important part here. I think this is not just people outside of cEDH. These are also players within cEDH. People really underestimate the commander part of competitive commander when we describe like the cEDH itself. People really underestimate how important it is that people play things they're interested in, and that's like a primary driver for why they're interested in the format. There are players who come from like, let's say, Legacy or just in general, who will ask like, what is the most competitive deck? I want to play that. I want to play something spiky, interactive, and I don't really care what commander is there. That is like a group of players, but then there's also like a really big group of players within cEDH who started off in Commander, or maybe just starting off Magic in general, but they're like, this guy Tasigur looks dope. I love the bananas. How do I make the strongest Tasigur deck? I don't want to play anything else. I want to make this the best deck I can because I like associate myself with like the character or something like that, or I find the character interesting. That's like a very Commander thing, and it's like the same thing with me trying to play like Sire of Insanity or Embercleave, where like take some sort of offbeat like funny like card and try and make it work within the cEDH like social rule set. And I think people like often underestimate how important that is, because oftentimes like I see people joining like the Discords saying like, I just started Commander, I want to like take, let's say, I don't know, Marrow-Gnawer or something like that, and I want to make Marrow-Gnawer as strong as possible. And you're like, the immediate response is like, why would you play Marrow-Gnawer? If you want to play Mono Black, you should play like, I even think Kirk is acceptable now. Like, why aren't you playing, I don't know, Mono Black City C? That's not even that good anymore. I don't know, like, the immediate response is like, why aren't you playing something better? Here's a decklist database, why don't you try something else from there? And and that I feel like that's just so damaging to like someone trying to enter the format, because what if they don't want to play like something else? What if they honestly want to play Maronar? And I do understand like the nuances of like wanting to try to curate games and make the environment more agreeable to people who understand like the meta better, like who understands like who have like a preconceived like notion of what cEDH is. If I'm playing Blue Farm, I don't want to play a game against Maronar because it's not really testing the deck that I'm designed into that metaphor. But at the same time, it's like I think it's very difficult to also kind of say like I've already like I know for a fact that deck is not going to be good. Like I don't quite agree with like if this person is in good faith really trying to build something they're interested in within like the cEDH like rule set, or not rule set, but like the intent and like the meta, why not let them try it? And I think if they're playing in good faith to be competitive with the strategies they're interested in, you let them play it, then you play what you want to play and show them why it's not competitive. And even if it beats them and stuff like that, that gives you the opportunity to like help them understand like, all right, I know you want to play Maronar, so you're seeing how Maronar can compete with these kind of strategies, right? And work with them on how to like kind of bring them into the community and like bring them into the format. I said format, it's not a format. It's hard to like break away from saying it like that, but bring them into cEDH that way, because there are a lot of decks that come out that like initially is very different, like it's so different that you can't help but respond like there's no way that's good. And I'm talking about like Sakashima Kodama, right? Like that thing won a tournament and it top 4 another tournament, and despite like how you might describe like, well, it was playing like it's like a turbo strategy against like 3 other turbo strategies, no one's interacting with it, of course it's gonna win. Like is it really cEDH? Like there are a lot of things you can say to make it not cEDH, but it got there, and to me like that opens up so much opportunities for us to just kind of accept people as long as they're like enter like playing within what we consider to be cEDH. And I mean like that socially. It's all like kind of loose right now. I'm still working through it, but hopefully like this is like helping some of us understand a little bit better. So how does he's finally done. How does all of this tie together to the original point of like or I guess what I highlighted earlier with cEDH is the future of Commander. And I agree with that. But I don't, it's not because I think people will play cEDH. I believe cEDH is the future of Commander because we need to have a baseline for people to reference off of. Every other baseline that we have so far is so difficult to gauge against each other, and cEDH so far is the most defined or easily defined space in terms of power level, in terms of expectation. If I tell someone who's new to Commander, if you play cEDH, here's what I can give them like a list of what they can expect. If I tell them like something else, I kind of have to say like, well, within like mid power, the first couple turns might be like a little slower, and then you might run into this. But if you go to like 6.5, you might see like it's harder to define. And something else that I think is important that people like don't really consider is the natural behavior of what gamers are like. And stick with me here. Imagine you just downloaded like a new mobile game. Like what's the first thing you normally do? You go to check out a tier list. You try and find out what's competitive. Not because you want to play as competitively as possible, but you want to understand from like from just that baseline of like, all right, I'm playing this Marvel game or something, and I want to know which characters are the strongest. I like Captain America the most. And I'm actually more like an Iron Man stan. Let's say Iron Man. Oh, actually, no, Bucky. Bucky's really great right now. I'm going to go Winter Soldier. But like, let's say I'm a super huge Winter Soldier fan. I just want to know how strong Winter Soldier is. And if I see Winter Soldier is like a C or whatever, I'm like, I'll roll for him or whatever. But you see what I'm getting at here. Like, the initial like understanding of a game comes from like a competitive mindset, and I think that's why cEDH is the future of Commander, because it is the easiest space to define. It's the most like you have the most amount of people dedicating like their time and effort to like really fleshing and defining this thing, even though there's like some elements of like gatekeeping or whatever. Like still we can understand that this format is a turn 2 turn 3 format at its highest level, and from there we can go back. Then we can say, well, I'm not trying to play that. compared to this, I'm trying to do this other thing instead. Or you can play cEDH as well, but having cEDH be like the baseline as a reference, I think is very useful in the future when we have conversations about just anything really, because right now, like, anything we talk about is so difficult to not get in a fight with. For example, like, if I want to say, like, I want to unban Paradox Engine, and that's like a personal opinion or whatever, like, you don't have to, or it's hard to like have that conversation without with all these different voices coming in, not just either invalid or whatever, but like, if I can just use cEDH as a reference, as a baseline to set up my argument to say, well, from a power level perspective, in CD at its like fastest, like most degenerate way to play Commander, Paradox Engine is not going to break the game. All right, so we can exclude that from the conversation. That's an understood like point. But here's a reason why Paradox Engine should be banned, and it's because it's not power levels, it's the experience of having a player play, like, trigger Paradox Engine again and again, having 4 players do that, and then like the additional time it takes to like resolve a turn makes the play experience negative. And from there, in my perspective, that's a very strong argument for why Paradox Engine stays banned. But if we don't use like that baseline, if we don't use that reference point, it's very difficult to get agreement, because then you have like, then you're considering like, oh, this other group is just trying to say something to like, I don't know, unban that thing or whatever. I think it's useful to just have like certain baselines just so that we can talk about and understand it that way, so we can divorce those conversations, because I don't think Commander is about power levels at the end of the day. Like, it's not about playing optimally. Like, you can, but I don't think it is. And even though competitive is within the name of competitive Commander, ultimately I believe will never be a competitive format itself. There's just too many things like in the way of how the game is designed that will keep it from being competitive. And I think that's great. And to illustrate this point, like, one of my favorite jokes is like, can you imagine if you take like pro players and have them play like competitive Commander? Can you imagine, like, let's say Brayden from cEDH Cast playing with like LSV and Reed Duke and me, let's put me, because I'm telling this story, so I want to self-insert into this fanfic, and Reed Duke is about to like resolve a thing, and LSV packed in negations the SS Oracle or something, but he can't, the LSV can't pay for the pack trigger. Can you imagine Brayden and I trying to be like, oh, explain to LSV like that's king making and like that's spy play? Like, I think that's so funny, and to me also just highlights the point, like, technically it's legal, but there's a lot of what goes into this game that is social, and that's what keeps like cEDH ultimately a casual format. It's like competitive with an asterisk, and there are a lot of people who play cEDH who don't really want to play it at its highest level. There are people who like understand that Turbo NOS is a thing, but they don't want to play Turbo NOS. And this was kind of my experience also back then during the Flash meta, where everyone was trying to like kind of put down some of my brews to say like, it'll never beat Flash, it'll never do. But to me, it was like, I never, there's only one person who played Flash like in my whole meta. I played like Commander and like competitive Commander in like 4 different stores and like GP, like 2 different GPs and shit like that, and I've only ran into like Flash like maybe twice or 3 times, which is like maybe a different experience from you, but in my perspective, it's like, why are you holding me against a standard that I never really see? Like, this game is casual, and it's always going to be casual, I think. And even though we try and make it competitive, even though things get streamlined with like EDH rec and all these other resources coming out, it's always going to be casual. And I think that's why making it more competitive, giving more resources for people to learn and understand and build their decks and streamline their decks will help ultimately make the format itself better. And I guess the last thing I'll add to this is like, I know there are a lot of like sentiments behind, like, against EDH rec, against like data and streamlining of decks, and I understand like the original intent of Commander is like kind of being able to take the cards you normally won't be able to play in other formats and like play them in this kind of wacky deck that like getting to see those weird cards come together, as I said earlier in the video. is very satisfying. And to see like every single game devolve to like Soul Ring, Cultivate, into like Smothering Tithe, into like Fierce Guardianship, like it does take away some of the magic of the game. However, the example, well, the thing that really sold me on streamlining decks is I recently invited one of my best friends to play Magic with me, and playing Commander specifically, and he's never played Magic before, maybe like once a long time ago, but he doesn't know anything about like just like the sets, the cards, whatever. Like there's so many cards, right? And he bought a Commander deck, and it was the Geared Populate like tokens deck. I showed him a couple different options for precons, and he was like, this is the one for me. This dude makes rhinos, I'm game. And I'm like, sick, all right, let's play it a little bit. And after we played Commander, like we played those precons together, he was like, this is a great game, I love it. How do I upgrade this deck? And then instead of me going through like explaining every little thing to him, or like giving him Gatherer or Scryfall, or like finding him a video to watch, I'm like, here's EDH Rec. Here's the deck here's the deck that you want to build, and just click around. Look at the things that you can and see. And that experience of him just having that resource there to look at it and like as a reference point, and slowly like build the connections, like, oh, you can like double the tokens with like doubling season, and you can like do like, I think that is such an invaluable resource. And like I would hate to like imagine what it's like not having those resources for him and other new players coming in. I think Commander, as great of a casual format it is, it's also very daunting, I think, to get into sometimes. And I think having like those streamlined baselines to reference off of makes it so much easier to get in. But I think that's the video for today. I hope that gets the ball rolling on like how we can start talking about cEDH in the regards of Commander. I think it's all one format. cEDH is not a separate format. It is a rule, like a rule zero, an understood like social like set of etiquettes and expectations, and like a very defined meta within this whole game of Commander. I don't think it's like its own thing. Like it has its own community, but we're playing the same game. And I think as soon as we start understanding that and talking to each other as like we're playing the same game, it's gonna make it a lot easier. To remove some of the suspicions like, oh, cEDH is coming to like get us or whatever. Yeah, we are. Just kidding.